Welcome to Solo, the single person's guide to a remarkable life. Your host, a behavioral scientist and bachelor, talks to leading experts and successful singles about living solo and living well. Travel more, make things, sleep in when you want to. Here's the playbook for the person who is unapologetically unattached. Now, please welcome Dr. Peter McGraw.
Welcome back. This episode features a remarkable solo, Lisa Lampanelli. A stand-up comedian who became famous for roasting celebrities, Lisa has reinvented herself from the quote-unquote queen of mean to the quote-unquote queen of meaning. We discuss how Lisa climbed the comedy mountain, from clubs to theaters to Radio City Music Hall, before retiring from stand-up to sit down and set aside her anger in order to help people. I taped this episode as part of the solo show on Fireside, and as part of that Q&A, I captured some bonus material. What is a failure that Lisa has learned from? You can access bonus material in the private solo community. Sign up at petermcgraw.org/solo. You can also check out the new website. And as always, please rate, review, subscribe, and tell your remarkable single friends and family. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Let's get started. Welcome to Solo, the single person's guide to a remarkable life. This is a live taping as part of the solo show on Fireside. We're joined by a remarkable solo, Lisa Lampanelli. For more than 30 years, Lisa toured the world as a stand-up comedian. She is best known for her skills roasting celebrities such as David Hasselhoff, William Shatner, and Pamela Anderson. Now retired, the quote-unquote queen of mean has tried her hand at life coaching and has recently launched a more fitting project, a podcast, Losers with a Dream, where she advises and occasionally roasts her co-hosts, Bo McDowell and Nick Scopoletti, two fledgling millennial comedians as they talk about their feelings and their struggles. Welcome, Lisa.
Hey, I just unmuted myself. I took the opportunity to be technically savvy so that you can all hear my dulcet tones. How are you, Peter?
I'm great. Dulcet tones. That is the first time I've ever been described that way. Thank you.
Exactly. I mean, we are just born for radio/podcasting/anything off camera.
I certainly was. I'm thrilled to have you here. I am a longtime follower of your work. I spent many years actually studying comedy before turning my attention to destigmatizing single living and celebrating remarkable solos like yourself. And frankly, I'm more interested in your post-retirement life than your pre-retirement life.
Yeah. It's very interesting how that's what I like to concentrate on, because I always crack up when someone will start to interview me and go, so how'd you start comedy? And it's like, that's been online for 30 years. You can read that stuff. Yes. But this stuff about how it's very interesting to go from being high profile or even highly busy to barely doing anything, how much of a struggle that can be. It's not as easy as people think.
I think a lot of people are unprepared for retirement. They don't have a plan for it. And you write that you have gone from standing to sitting.
Yeah, it's really wild to go, oh my God, what am I supposed to put into my life every day that just brings me joy, but doesn't sort of have the illusion of chasing something? Do you know what I mean? Like when we're in our 20s, 30s, 40s, even teens, some people always chasing something. What's the next thing? What's the next thing? And I'm going, oh, wow. Like, what do I do today? And that's really hard when you're used to medicating with busyness. Like, I think a lot of us, when we have big careers or even small careers, we medicate with keeping ourselves busy and looking in that calendar and going, oh, let me distract from my feelings by running around. And I did that for so many years that I'm like, ooh, this is uncomfortable, but clearly is kind of, I'm making the steps towards that.
Yeah, indeed. Even just setting aside this achievement orientation that people often have, especially connected to their careers, and then focusing on other things. And I actually really find, in many ways, it feels like a reversal. So good comedy is often built on reversal. Roasts are often built on reversals. If I may, armchair psychologist for a moment, make an observation, and then I'd love to hear your reaction to it, is you're a bit of a paradox, I think, Lisa. You made your name being mean, in a sense, but you also call yourself now as someone who has a savior complex, who seems focused on helping people.
Yeah.
Has that always been the case? And it's just you had a stage persona and then a backstage persona?
Yeah.
Where does the savior complex come from?
I mean, that's interesting that you even bring it up today, because yesterday I'm working with a shrink who deals with trauma. And I never, thank God, had any trauma with a capital T. But I had many, as we all do, a million small traumas.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that got unearthed yesterday was that I thought I could save my family by staying thin. I thought I could, as irrational it sounds, like when you dig deep, you're like, oh my God, mommy had all her hopes on me for being the thin one or the one who made it. And even if it wasn't said, it was implied. So it's whatever we pick up as kids. So I think I was always trying to save my family. And yesterday when I was working with this therapist, he was like, whose picture comes in your mind now? And interestingly enough, it was one of my co-hosts of my podcast. It wasn't both. It was just one of them. And I'm thinking, why him? And I'm like, oh, because his mom died when he was 6. So it's all so connected. So I think I always had the savior thing. And the way that manifested in comedy was I was trying to save them by what Jim Carrey calls comedians freers of other people's concerns. So you free them of their concerns. When you're on stage, they don't think about their problems. So I think that's what I tried to do subconsciously for 30 years. And then I was like, well, now I could do it in a more overt way. And through my podcast, Losers with a Dream, I can be like, oh, here's how to help yourself, but we have humor with it too. So again, I don't think it's very healthy to have a savior complex. I'm trying to get out of it as much as I can and get more balance. Just do it on the podcast, and then you don't have to save anyone else.
You can release yourself.
Yeah.
But before the podcast, which seems, I mean, I've listened and you're in your element with these guys. It's a really wonderful dynamic that the three of you have. And it's incredibly authentic and fun and feisty, not surprisingly. You tried your hand as a life coach beforehand, and that just didn't seem to work.
Right. Because I am not someone who likes to go on a journey with people. I like to tell people what they're doing wrong and have them fix it. But that's literally the worst quality in a therapist or life coach or anyone. So I was taking this 3-year coaching certificate program. And after a half a year, I was like, well, this isn't for me because I'm getting frustrated with these people and it's none of my business to do that. And no one has ever dragged me on a journey, therapist or coach or whatever. So I'm going, this isn't the right thing. But the good thing about that coaching program was I got a bunch of tools that at least I'm able to use with these guys and with myself and sort of use them in small doses. But then we have humor too. So I think what I tried to do was I overcorrected. You know how we do? We date someone who's dumb, and then we date someone who's a genius. We date someone who's fat, then date someone who's thin. And then we're like, oh, okay, maybe the opposite isn't exactly what I should be looking for. So I overcorrected, became too serious, and now I'm like, oh, I can combine both.
Yes. What is an example of one of these tactics that you learned in life coaching school?
Well, the exact exercises, like it's boring and a journey, and a lot of Byron Katie's stuff about, is that story the truth about the story you're telling yourself? And is it really true? And how would you act if that story wasn't true? So there are a lot of coaching exercises, and we cut to the chase quickly in the podcast because it's an hour. But it's kind of good to know those things because you go, well, at least I'm not just yelling at these guys saying change. I don't think that's healthy, and I kind of enjoyed yelling for a while on stage. I don't think that's what I'm supposed to do anymore.
Yeah, I think I can see how you want to find that in between. This reinvention that you've gone through, I love a good reinvention.
Yes, me too.
And I think that one of the things that prevents that oftentimes is people, they climb their mountain.
Yes.
They get really good at something, and then they just play it safe. They just keep doing the same thing over and over again. I had read in one of your interviews, I think you had mentioned how some comedians were envious of your decision to retire.
Well, I was shocked. The only reason I knew that was because this documentary got made right before the pandemic. It was called Hysterical on FX. And Nikki Glaser, when they showed the clip of me saying on Howard Stern, retiring publicly, and they cut to an interview with Nikki, she's like, oh my God, she got out. Oh my God, I hope I have the self-esteem to do that someday. And I was so moved because I think a lot of us just get on that treadmill of like, well, we got to keep going. I did it for 30 years. It's like when you're married or have a longtime partner, you're like, well, I invested 3 years of my life. I mean, can I start over? And people forget you do have a choice. And I know that it's not easy. I know that I come from a privileged position of being someone who's good at saving money, someone who doesn't mind downsizing to one small house instead of 4 places to live. So I come from a spot of privilege, but I think at least if people want to change a little, you can make a little change and just every year inch towards that not being stuck thing.
Yes. So your decision to do it on Howard Stern, to do it so publicly and to broadcast it so widely, I have to assume was well thought out, that you wanted it to be big.
Oh, yeah. I wanted it to be where I couldn't go back, because we all have a tendency to let ourselves off the hook sometimes. So even now, like, we're doing a couple live podcast tapings at different clubs just to see if we like doing it. And someone was like, I thought you retired. And I'm like, no. This is us sitting down doing a podcast live. This isn't us doing stand-up. Right. Believe me, I'd rather eat a gun than do stand-up again. But I think it was a good idea. And also it was Stern because I knew Howard liked me. I knew I'd been on, and I knew he'd take it seriously and wouldn't make fun of it or say, you'll be back or any of that crap, because he struggles with the idea of retirement himself. So luckily, indeed, everybody seemed to hear that show, and Dr. Drew called me and Dr. Oz and Wendy Williams. So it got a lot of traction, me going on these shows and talking about why I was getting out.
I think one of the other benefits of Stern is that he's not afraid to ask the hard questions. Yeah. That he doesn't just give a puff interview.
Oh, he's the best. He literally has just become the best interviewer of our time. So it's kind of nice that I was given that opportunity. I was shocked when they said yes. It was great because it was like, okay, you guys come on and we'll do your last roast ever. And it was so much fun because I got to do that one last hurrah. And then I was like, whoo, never have to do that again.
So you felt, after leaving that studio, you felt liberated?
Yeah, I felt liberated when I decided to do it, when I decided to retire. I just was like, when you know, you know.
And how long prior to doing that, like how long had you been thinking about a retirement? Did you start planning for it? What did that process look like?
Yeah, I think it was subconsciously in there from the night I did Radio City. And I've told this story a lot. I came off stage at Radio City. And again, it was a big night for me. I remember the promoter, meaning nothing bad about it, said, oh my God, next Madison Square Garden. And instead of having that effect of like, yeah, it was like, oh my God, it's never going to be enough.
I see.
I'm never going to be able to outrun myself. It's all bullshit. Achievement means nothing. If I don't work on myself internally, I'll never be happy. And I think that's when the little seed got planted, but it took about 10 years for me to be like, oh, I'm not enjoying this as much as I used to. And I remember calling my business manager 2 years before I retired. And I said, dude, I don't want to do this anymore. I hate the lifestyle. I don't hate the stage. I hate the life. And he goes, well, if you're willing to downsize, you can save for 2 more years and you can be out. And I was like, done. And I'm the type, my parents raised us again to save, to live small. And oh my God, it felt so good. It was just like freeing as F. But I did keep it secret till I saved and got out. And I think what sucks is I still look for books about retirement, and all that's available, it seems, is books about the financial part. It's never about the emotional part.
Yes.
And people don't know what it's like to go from my identity as an insurance salesman, as a comic, as a whatever I am, postal worker. They don't know. Your identity is wrapped up in your job. And when you get out, you are literally at sea. So it's very tough transition. And it took, 3-4 years now? And it's finally starting in the past 6 months to feel balanced day by day. I fall back and then I got to rebalance.
Did you have to give up some kind of rituals and habits that you had around comedy in order to start to free yourself and to change that identity? Did you get up in the morning and write every day? Did you have something that kind of one of the things about comic life is I need to be at the club at X time.
Right.
Otherwise, you often have a very free day and you create structure to enhance your ability to make good comedy. Did you have those things in place and have to relearn them?
I mean, not really. I was a theater comic, so I had no longer for years been walking into clubs and all that. I felt that was very sort of like, what do I need a hit every night with this stuff? Like, I didn't like that life. I hated it. So I'd go and fly to the theater, fly into the town, check into the hotel, do that. I hated that life. I hated being away from home, my parents, my family, my friends. I just was like, ugh. So no, I couldn't have been happier. I had no ritualistic bullshit. Like I literally was like, ugh, all of it done.
That was easy.
I think that's when I always said, I know when I'm done. I know when I'm done with a house. I know when I'm done with a relationship. I don't go back and forth. So I wait to make the decision till it's like, oh, thank you, God. But again, the decision's done. The walking away is great. But then you're like, so what now? And how to not clutter up my life with more busyness to distract from having a real life again.
Well, let's talk about one of those episodes where you made a decision to move on, and that was your divorce in 2015. So you said that you suffered, these are my words, not yours, from both anger and boredom.
Oh my God.
In that relationship.
I guarantee you I was so angry with myself. And I don't say picking badly as a slur to Jimmy because we're still friends. I actually introduced him to his current wife and I went to the wedding. So we're friends. But dude, I'm like, what is wrong with me that I keep picking friends to marry? Like, because we were just like kind of friends. I mean, everything's romantic in the beginning, but I go fast, I go in hard, and I'm like, man. So then, we're bored with each other. I'm constantly sending him to like, hey, I have to work on a roast. Why don't you go to Canyon Ranch for a month? Okay. Like, it's just like literally not marriage. It was a friendship. But then it's like, okay, shouldn't we be with people or by ourselves that make us feel like we're whole and like we're doing what we're supposed to in life? So I knew he wanted sort of someone who loves to cook and be Italian and do this and go to concerts. And I'm like, ugh, kill me. And I'm so happy he found somebody because, dude, I am so not the marrying kind. I'm so not the girlfriend kind. I'm so like content and just peaceful by myself. Like I can't even imagine sucking someone into this world under false pretenses again because I don't want someone around ever. And does part of that mean I'm emotionally unavailable? Probably part of it. But 50% is definitely like, oh my God, gratitude for being allowed to be by myself.
Well, Lisa, one thing I can tell you is you're not alone. A recent Pew Center study asked single people about what their dating and mating goals were, and 50% of American adult singles are not interested in dating either casually or seriously at the moment. It's something no one talks about.
Right.
And there's a lot of stigma around sort of not wanting it, not doing it well, wanting something unconventional. And I like to cite that statistic because what I like to say is it's totally normal and appropriate to want to date, and it's totally normal and appropriate to not want to date. Right. And not enough people have a license to say, I'm not willing to compromise what I like to do, who I am, in order to do this thing that I think everyone else is doing, but actually are not.
Well, Michael Ian Black, I had met him casually, and I asked him why I kept going after a sitcom idea, like selling sitcoms, because I sold like 3. And I go, why do I keep going after that if I don't want it? And he goes, you're living a dream, but it's somebody else's dream. So yes, I think the dating and the romance part, and I was a serial monogamist for way too long. Like from 13 when I had my first little boyfriend in high school to 40, I didn't have a break in between. And I was like, uh-oh, this is total codependence for me. So I said, let me take a few years and not do this. And what happened was, I think I had the biggest compliment in the world from my sister-in-law a few years ago. And she said, I've never seen anyone so good at being single as you are. And it's because I realized the love of family, friends, activities, the podcast, the friends I have, the dogs, the little house that feels warm. That's enough right now. I'm not saying never, but kind of joking, but I'm not when I'm like the best accessory a woman can have is a dead husband because you prove you're cute enough to get somebody, but you don't have to live with them. And again, that applies to a dead wife too. But I didn't want to sit around waiting for Jimmy to die. It wasn't fair to him or me. And I don't know, dude, I wake up every day going, I don't want to change anything. And I think that's fine. But society does sort of make you wonder if there's something wrong with you and that you're emotionally not available. And I will say, I'm sure there's part of it that's that. And that can be looked at when it's appropriate.
Indeed. Well, you might have found your rival in Comfortable Singles in me and many of my listeners. You're going to be a welcome member of the solo community because I'm so heartened when I hear, I like this term, unapologetically unattached.
Yeah.
You epitomize that.
Yeah. And I will say it's funny. I think I used to get asked a lot because, of course, I'd be on Jay Leno or people who are funny, Howard and everything. And they go, well, don't you even want to have sex or whatever? And I'd be like, honestly, women are lucky because we hit menopause at a certain age and we don't want to have sex anymore. And I go, so it's kind of saving me from even thinking about that. So I don't know how anyone else gets around that whole thing. I'm just lucky because, dude, if you ask me on a list of the top 200 things I want to do, Like, it wouldn't even occur to me to date, go out with anyone. I mean, I think that's okay.
No, it's more than okay. It's completely normal and appropriate. The range of sexual behavior and romantic behavior is much broader than most people ever understand. So, for example, I did a previous solo episode on asexuality. And our best estimate, and I think this is a low estimate, is that 1 in 100 people are asexual. That is that they have no interest in sex. They might even find it aversive. And this might be something they're born into. This might be something that they've developed into. They may have had experiences that have led to this. But I think that number is way, way higher, especially when you take into account the fact that you have, as you mentioned, I think this is especially the case with older women who've kind of done their thing, so to speak. Maybe not have always had the best experiences.
Right.
Maybe associate sex with having children and creating family more than pleasure. Or they just frankly have other better things to do than hang out and date other old men.
Well, yeah. I mean,
like, I've done that enough.
But I was almost going to joke and say, well, if I could get Idris Elba, I'd probably do it. But I don't even think I would, because I always joke around about sex. I always go, well, sex to me was always like Christmas morning. It was like, it happened once a year, and it left me with a big mess to clean up. I don't remember ever having the best experiences of my life. And I'm like, what do I, every Valentine's Day, I get a UTI and a pinched nerve in my neck? I don't need it. So again, I'm sure there's a lot of unhealthy attitudes of mine, being raised Catholic, and I'm not blaming that, but kind of having a very repressed mother and father. I'm sure there's some of that in there. So again, I don't count on, oh my God, I'll never do this again. Somebody said to me once, whatever has occurred to you to make happen, you've made happen. So if that occurs to you, that that's something you want to have happen, you'll make it happen. I don't believe in manifesting. I don't think see it and you'll believe it and you can become it. But I think if I know I want it, I go after it.
I have no doubt, Lisa. I mean, when I look at your career and especially look at your post-retirement life, you're no less ambitious. It's just, I shouldn't say that. You're on a growth path, more so now than I think in some ways you were prior to retirement, where you were just doing the same thing, doing it well, living a mostly good life, right? But clearly you identified, I don't want to get on planes. I don't want to sleep in hotel rooms. And I think it's really wonderful that you freed yourself. I could see why Nikki Glaser would be envious of it, because you're living a remarkable life and recognizing that there is more than one way to live a remarkable life.
Yeah. And it's interesting when I think a big revelation came when some woman was interviewing me, her master's thesis about comedy. And this is when I was still doing it, but not very happily. And she said something like, what are your 10 biggest accomplishments? And I listed them all. And she's like, but none of those are about your career. Like, it literally off the top of my head, 10 things fell out of my mouth. Like, oh, I finally cooked a Thanksgiving dinner for my folks. Oh, I had my brother and sister with me to this place or whatever. And I'm like, oh my God, like I'm listing accomplishments, the real stuff. And I don't really care about this achievement shit. So I think, again, that was my way of medicating myself, getting attention, proving myself worthy. And there's nothing better than having nothing to prove.
I agree. If I may for a moment do a quick lesson on well-being that might, I think, help the listener sort of understand this interesting transition you're in. I think there's these sort of 4 kind of ways to live a good life. One is a life of pleasure, of happiness, of joy, of laughter, of good food, of aesthetics. And we know people who like that kind of life. There's the life of, as you already mentioned, some sort of purpose. Now, that might be achievement focused. I want to build something. I want to be famous. I want to win the Nobel Prize. I want to stand on the stage at Madison Square Garden. It might be meaning based. That is, I want to do something bigger than myself. I want to cure cancer. I want to create a family. I want to feed the poor. Or it might be, lastly, engagement based. That is, I want to do creative pursuits. Like, I want to make stuff and I want to become fully immersed in the creative, artistic problem-solving process. And a lot of comics, from my experience, kind of have one foot in the engagement world. They love making jokes and that artistic process. And then in the other one in the achievement world, right? Like, I want to get big. I want to get famous. I want to do this really, really well. And what I have seen, and you please correct me if you disagree, is that you have shifted your purpose from achievement to meaning.
Right.
I see that in your podcast. I see that in your pursuit of life coaching, even though you recognize it wasn't the right fit for you. And you've been able to do this because one of the nice things about comedians is they tend to be really honest in terms of how they see the world. You have translated that honesty into honesty about yourself.
Yeah, it's funny with the meaning part, because when I retired, I went on Elvis Duran's show and he coined the phrase. He goes, "Oh my God, you went from the queen of mean to the queen of meaning." And I was like, oh, I'm stealing that. So he recognized.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, because we're very friendly, he and I. I was like, oh, he gets it. He sees it. And I have to say, though, I think the word purpose is thrown around way too much and puts way too much pressure on people. I think it's bullshit. Okay. I think having purpose with a small p is just as valid, if not more, than purpose with a big P. And people drive themselves, including me in the past, literally insane over, but I don't have that big purpose. I'm not doing anything. I'm not doing enough. I don't have the big P. What's my P? And they're chasing this thing that doesn't exist instead of doing everything with meaning and purpose. So say I'm doing your show.
I see.
Suppose you were new, you had no listeners, and I just am doing this because I'm doing you a favor. That's not purpose with a P. That's purpose with a small p of going, hey, man, I'm going to help this guy because people before me helped me when I was really little. What's great is that you can go to Starbucks and do it with purpose. You can fix dinner for your dog with purpose. It's we're infusing it in instead of chasing the big P. And people get tripped up, I think, on that big P purpose. And the self-help industry has loved that. Doing every book in the world to take our money about finding your purpose. We don't have a purpose. Guess what we have? To live purposely.
I think that's really well said. And I think, again, the world tells you you should be pursuing partnerships. You're saying the world's telling you you should be pursuing purpose. And really what you should be doing is finding the thing that works well for you.
100%. Like people, literally I said to the guys when we started our podcast, I was like, if we get no listeners, that's okay. Or 10 listeners or whatever, because they're going to get something out of it. And yeah, they have different goals because they haven't been famous yet. They don't know that it is the answer to literally nothing, like literally nothing. And they have to find that out on their own journey. But my purpose is everybody who listens maybe feels a little better, maybe feels less alone. So I'm thankful I accomplished enough. And Jim Carrey said it best when he said, everyone should be rich and famous for a week to see that it doesn't solve anything. So these guys are going to have to see it for themselves.
I want to backtrack for a moment. You had talked about there's a lot of resources by which to prepare financially for retirement.
Right.
There's not as many for preparing your identity for retirement. Let's talk about those two things first. Let's talk about the financial stuff, because I think that's important, especially when you're solo. Solos have the ability to live small, but they have the challenge of having to do it on their own.
Yeah.
And so in some ways, you have to be more judicious with your finances as a solo than as a partner person, because you don't have that hedge. You don't have that other person to rely on if you lose your job and so on. So when you started to think about your financial freedom, what are some of the things that you did, and how different is your life now post-retirement than before?
Well, I was lucky enough that I always had very moral, good business managers because they were vetted by people. So I never had a guess about, can this guy be trusted to give me good advice? So everybody should probably get a referral. Don't just get some guy out of the phone book. So what I was raised as was you never have credit card debt. You just don't. You never buy a car unless it's cash. And even if it's a junker, like drive around in the $600 Nissan, whatever, until you can afford the car, but pay cash. So my parents always had that old fashioned mentality because they were raised in the Depression. So luckily that stuck with me. And I never lived above my means. My means were pretty damn big for a while, but nothing ever was, that's beyond. It was always, you can afford this. So you have to also be willing to take the ego out of it. So say you're kind of in a 5-bedroom home, you have a normal life, you and your husband earn a couple $100,000 a year and you want to retire. It's like, okay, can our ego withstand moving to a 2-bedroom apartment? Like you have to be able to be like, okay with that. So I was able to, when I got out, I was like, I got to sell one house. I got to buy my parents' house because I always wanted to live here where I grew up. I had to get rid of apartments, get rid of another house. And I was like, eventually you get to the point that it's not tied to your identity to be like, I'm the chick who owns all this, all these shoes and all these bags. And it's just, I think you start working on what has meaning. And those things really never made me happy. I don't think they make anybody happy, to be honest with you. I think they're all sort of Band-Aids for what really ails us, which is lack of connection. So I think just saving, getting rid of that credit card debt. I mean, Susie Orman had that right all along. She's old school, and she's the chick who told us that all along.
Yeah, you're echoing a previous podcast that I had with my financial person, Money Amy, I call her, and we talked about the steps to financial freedom, and the credit card stuff was like top of the list and so important to do. You've also changed your identity. As I said, I like a good reinvention. You've also changed your look.
Yeah,
you know, the Lisa Lampanelli that I used to see on the Comedy Central roasts it looks like a different person than the Lisa I see today. How did that evolve? Was that part of the retirement play?
No, well, what had happened was after Celebrity Apprentice, I was like, okay, this struggle with weight and food has got to end, which, by the way, it still hasn't. It never really does end. You're always sort of one meal away from going off the deep end, but it's something a daily practice. But I was like, I've done every diet exercise program in the world. There wasn't anything I hadn't tried. And I was like, okay, at the time, my husband were like, we have to talk about weight loss surgery and sort of get rid of this because we want to live longer. So luckily, I was able to keep most of the weight off even through the pandemic. And that was pre-retirement, but just by a couple years. And I think a lot of it was just going, okay, like we hit age 50, we got to start getting our S together. So luckily, that's kind of stuck for me. Again, daily struggle about, okay, how are we going to eat today? Let's make sure we do our best because we can only do our best. But yeah, I think somebody brought up to me over the weekend how that old Lisa with the dresses and the hair and everything, it was kind of drag in a way. It was like kind of doing drag. It was dressing up. And it was a character because it's more shocking when words that are crazy come out of the mouth of someone who looks like their Beaver's mother.
Very traditional.
From the 50s.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So now it's like I just kind of like, I unfortunately think I turned back the clock so much that now I dress like a 19-year-old. But I'm like, oh, so what? I lost the weight. I might as well have some fun with it.
Yeah, I think that's really wonderful. I never thought about that contrast of Leave It to Beaver. What is it? I don't even remember her name, Jane or something like that.
June Cleaver.
June, thank you. Yes, June Cleaver roasting Hasselhoff. That's an interesting contrast.
Yeah, it was a complete accident because one day I used to do a lot of urban shows. So when you have a black audience, white comics don't usually go up, but I was really badass and I wasn't famous yet. And I was like, oh, just black hosts used to love that I could kill with a black audience. It's really hard. It's a different animal. And I loved it because I was like, oh, that makes me special. So, and I'm still proud of that because I can connect with everybody. So I remember one day I showed up at a show. I was running in for an audition where I had to dress conservatively. And I noticed it was funnier because I was dressed conservatively. And I go, oh, I'm rolling with this. And I ended up doing the ultra conservative outfits. So it's very cool how you just you notice things and evolve.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a classic comedian thing to do, is to notice how a phrasing, an attitude, an outfit can enhance the comedy and then just lean more into it because the laughs are number one.
Yeah, exactly.
And so now you're wearing the clothes that you feel most comfortable in. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, like I literally am going through all the slides. In the old days, if people don't know, when you took photos, you would get slides, not pictures. You'd need a projector. So I'm going to do a slideshow for my nieces and nephews on Christmas. And I saw a picture of myself from, I think I was probably 17, and I was in a Marshall Tucker Band t-shirt. And I had a perm, but it was cute. And I was like, oh my God, I look so much still like that chick. And I was like, oh, that was the real me before everything got messed up. Before I had to go to college, before I had to be away from my family and do all this achievement. I was like, I guess I kind of reverted in a good way. So it felt cute.
Yeah, regression is not necessarily bad. It depends on what you're regressing to.
The only part of comedy I remember loving unconditionally was the first 3 years it was open micing and just teaming with other comics and going, yeah, let's like write jokes. And that's why I did my podcast, because the two guys on my show, we met because we were just writing jokes and helping each other. And I'm like, man, isn't it funny how we can take one part of our career that was the beginning because it felt the best, and now I'm doing it again. So again, regressing, like you said, isn't a bad thing. It's something that we go, oh, I remember the good parts and I recreated it.
So one of the things that you are, and this I think fits this moniker, the Queen of Meaning, is how much of an ally you are for LGBTQ community.
Right.
And where's the evolution of that allyship for you?
Well, I think I probably started back when I was protested by the Westboro Baptist Church, this horrible organization that protested anyone with a gay following, or they did these horrible things that I won't go into to the gay community. And I had done a show. I knew they were protesting me. And I said that I would donate $1,000 for every protester who showed up. And I would give that to the gay men's health crisis in their name to kind of screw them over. So that felt great because it was like 50 grand in your face, mean gay haters. So then when I went on Celebrity Apprentice, I had earned $130,000 for the gay men's health crisis. And I volunteered a bit at their headquarters in the city. I've been on the AIDS walk, gay pride floats, things like that. And I probably in the last few years have dropped the ball in sort of, now I kind of do more, like I do some things for the Black Fairy Godmother, doing more stuff with the protesting for Black Lives Matter. So I probably shifted a little unintentionally, but I hope to still reach people, come to me for my voice. So it's something that I try to just do on a daily basis, opposed to just hear some big statements.
Yeah, I think that's really, really wonderful. I want to finish by asking you a question about this podcast, Losers with a Dream, because again, it fits this moniker, the Queen of Meaning. These two these losers with a dream, Bo and Nick, how would you describe your relationship with them? Is it a little bit maternal? Is it like we're friends and allies? It sounds like it's like a mix of a variety of things.
By the way, I'm included with that losers with a dream. I'm a loser. We're all losers. We all have some kind of dream that didn't come true or that we want to come true.
That's fair, yes.
I'm just as much of a fuck up as them. So I think it's really inclusive of the three of us. And at first I thought it was just going to be podcast buddies and I read them the riot act and coach them. And then it evolved into this weird friendship where like I actually like them. They're in the favorites in my phone. So like me and Bo had a big talk last night about his relationship and this and that. I'm like, how did we end up friends? So I noticed that now I'm shocked because they're 30 and they're guys and they're straight. Like I was always friends with women and gay men. And I'm like, this is cool. I feel like I've evolved going, I can include other people. Yeah. Are they going to have the life wisdom I do? No, but they are equals in a sense that they've lived some trauma I haven't. Like deaths at an early age or addiction or whatever. So I'm like, I guess they're not patients, they're peers. I had a shrink once who said, everybody in your life's either a patient or a peer. And I'm like, they're kind of peers now. It's weird. So I like it. And I do, though. We did an episode 2 weeks ago on fear of loss. And that came up because I was so scared to lose them as friends if the podcast doesn't work. And I'm like, wow, fear of loss keeps us from putting both feet in, like a relationship or a career or whatever. And I'm like, oh, I'm not going to hold back. But there's that scary thing of like us losing what we built in any respect. So yeah, I really like them. It pains me to say that I really like Bo and Nick.
Well, I think I'm on the other side of 50, and I think having young friends, having young peers is incredibly important in terms of staying in touch. And even being able to revisit different stages in your life. I'm a big believer in diversity in the same way that you are. And that could be sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, religion, but also age is one that I think is often overlooked. Well, I want older friends and I want younger friends to connect with a wide array of people.
I do find the people that annoy me most are my age. I mean, I've said it, and I'm sure I'm being completely ageist, but I found a lot of people my age to be close-minded and to definitely not be woke and to definitely be like stuck in their attitudes of like, oh, it's the most important thing is what I pay in taxes. No, it's not, asshole. It's that people are dying. So I think when the whole Black Lives Matter movement last summer was so huge, I was like, oh my God, how come everyone I like is 30 to 40 or possibly younger? And like, because like they're open-minded. So again, I'm sure there's people our age that are cool. I just find a lot of the people I hang out with are definitely under 50. And I'm like, cool, whatever it takes to keep me open-minded.
Well, Lisa, you have a youthful soul, which is very clear to me. Lisa, this has been a great pleasure to be able to get to know you. You live an unapologetic life, whether it be as a solo or not. I find that to be like truly inspirational, and I feel very fortunate to have a chance to chat with you today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, my friend.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening to Solo, the single person's guide to a remarkable life. For more about our guests and show notes, go to petermcgraw.org. Please subscribe and share with your single friends.